Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back to the session. I'm very happy to introduce this session's resource person. So we have Professor Paul.
Wait.
Happy to introduce our resource person today. We have Professor Paul Gunashekar, an eminent teacher, a trainer, and a good human being, a great human being. He was a professor in the Department of Materials Development, Testing and Evaluation at the English and Foreign Languages University, FLU, Hyderabad. He was educated in Bangalore and London. He specializes in materials development, course design, teacher development, English for specific purposes. He has taught English, trained teachers of English, developed instructional materials for English language teaching for over 43 years. He served the university as proctor, Dean of English Language Education, Dean of Publishing at different times. He retired from FLU in October 2017. Professor Paul Gunashekar has authored, co-authored and edited over 250 English teaching books for national agencies like NCERT, CBSE, National Institute of Open Schooling, IGNOU and various other national agencies and other state agencies like the government of Andhra Pradesh, Tripura, Mizoram and Orissa. He is a co-author of books titled Communicate in English, New Learning to Communicate for the Middle School, Provocations, a reading course for colleges, Writing for Life. He is general editor of New Wave English Readers and series editor of New Broadway, a multi-skill course in English, Skyline, an integrated course in English, published by Oxford University Press, India. He has developed audio materials for schools, video programs for colleges, and he has conducted over 100 teacher training workshops in countries like, apart from India, countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, UAE, Kuwait, and many other countries. He has presented papers at conferences and symposiums in countries like the UK, Holland, Japan, and many other countries. He has several research publications, notably the Directory of ELT Research in India. He has edited the FLU Research Journal Languaging. He has also conducted courses in business communication, communication skills, report writing, public speaking, presentation skills for corporate houses. He was awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship for ELT Research in the UK. He is advisor and Indian English consultant to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary. So, today we have a diverse group of participants. So, our participants are from various states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Maharashtra, UP, Assam, Tripura, Puducherry, Odisha, and West Bengal. So, I welcome you to talk to the participants. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you. I thought the jamuns were making you sleepy. I don't know what you had for dessert. Okay. Who's absent? I was just going to say, whoever's absent, raise your hand. Okay, first things first, make sure you are within viewing distance of one of the three screens, right? Those of you at the back, just make sure that you can actually see the screen clearly, because those are small screens and the lettering may not be large enough for you to see across the hall. And everything I'm going to do is based on the slides on the screen now. So here we go. We have two sessions today. The first one is on reading, and the second one is on words, vocabulary. And we'll do our first session on reading up to tea time. Now, what I'm going to list for you are 11 features of a plan that you can set yourself, prepare yourself with when you want to do a course in reading. Now, obviously, what I'm going to go through now very quickly can be administered over 1 year if you want to, right? So what I'm going to do is obviously not go down every point in the list. I'll choose just a few for the 90 minutes that we have for this particular session. So I suggest, where possible, you make notes. Okay? That's one way of focusing your mind, particularly after a heavy lunch. Okay? So don't tell yourself that I'll occasionally use my cell phone and capture it on my cell phone and go over it when I get back to wherever, Chennai, Dibrugarh, or wherever. That's not going to happen. So I suggest you pay attention while we go along. And when you think you haven't quite understood, if I might use that word, something that I said rather quickly or not too clearly, please raise your hand and I'll give you a clarification or I'll repeat it. Okay? Right. This is the possible list of the components of a plan for teaching reading and testing reading. What are the 2 cycles of reading? And I'm going to come back to several of these in a moment. Why learn to read? Why should we read at all? What is reading? Is it possible to arrive at some kind of a definition and explanation of the process of reading? What role does background knowledge play in the process of reading? What's the relationship between reading purpose and reading strategy? There is a link, and we'll briefly explore that later on in the presentation. What are the main kinds of reading, the chief kinds of reading? And within the kinds of reading, I'm going to be referring to skimming and scanning. How can they be used? And among the 4 kinds of reading, I'm certainly going to be referring to intensive reading, or what some people call study reading. And we're going to study the levels of reading comprehension required to make your intensive reading purposeful and successful. And when we actually do some teaching in the name of reading, what kind of guidance can we give before the act of reading? In other words, in the reading classroom, we often talk about pre-reading, while reading, and post-reading. And the pre-reading phase is particularly important, and we'll look at it briefly. We are not going to have time, I have a feeling, to look at extensive reading. Let's see how it goes. And the last component of the plan that, incidentally, I will have been referring to is how do we test reading comprehension? Okay. let's go straight on. To what a reading researcher called the two cycles of reading in terms of frustration and growth. So frustration and growth are seen as opposites. Obviously, a negative impact of one cycle on the reader and a positive impact in the other cycle on the reader. What does this cycle look like? Look at the phrase right at the top. When a learner reads something and doesn't quite understand what he's reading, the chances are he's going to read slowly, sometimes extremely slowly. And because he's reading so slowly, the sense of enjoyment also disappears. So instead of enjoying reading, looking at it as a pleasurable activity, he'll probably detest reading over a period of time, and as a result, he is not going to read very much. And if he's not going to read very much, he's not going to be able to understand what he's reading. Right? So the cycle goes round and round. In the second cycle, everything has changed now. Here the reader enjoys what he reads, and because he actually enjoys what he's reading, he's tempted to read fast, and because of practice, reading speed increases, and since he reads fast, he's able to finish books, chapters, articles, whatever, comics, very quickly, and therefore reaches out for more reading material. So he reads much more than the earlier learner we referred to, and because the process of reading keeps happening regularly, right, he actually realizes that his comprehension has increased. So his understanding increases, sometimes exponentially, and because he enjoys reading, the cycle continues. Okay. This is just a background. This is again just a clarification of something that is important for us, which is the difference between reading aloud and silent reading. Okay? Please notice the title. It's reading aloud. It's not loud reading. Okay? Loud reading would be loud reading. We're not talking of that. We're talking about verbalizing, vocalizing something in print. And in that sense, we are talking about the reader looking at the shape of what is there on paper, in this case, graphemes, letters of the English alphabet, and together they form a certain shape, right? Cat. And when you're reading aloud, you actually verbalize it, C-A-T, cat, you say, and the moment you mouth it, cat, the picture of a cat emerges in your mind. Not surprisingly, therefore, every time you read a paragraph aloud, it'll probably take 5 or 6 or 10 times longer than it would if you read it silently. Because when you're reading something silently, you see the word or words in print, and the meaning of what you're reading comes to your mind instantly. So you're saving yourself that intermediate stage of having to sound out what you see in print. So we are now talking about silent reading, and that's the focus of all adult reading, right? Reading aloud is for a small number of people, right? Professionals, that is. News anchors, for instance, right? Who need the ability to read aloud and read aloud well. But for the rest of us, it's silent reading that matters. I think my phone is on. Let me turn it off. I'm sorry. Could you turn your phones off, please? Suppose you want to offer a course in reading. You need a purpose, an aim, a set of objectives for launching such a reading program. Now, this is important, this little sentence I'm going to show you, because if you don't think about the aim of a reading course that you're offering, what you're essentially going to do is walk into the classroom, tell your learners, right, we're going to go through this particular anthology the rest of this semester, the rest of this year. So could you turn to page number 1, please? And we'll start with text number 1. Right? Now, that is not a very professional thing to do. Before we teach reading, we need to be sure about why we are doing reading in the first place. So this is a famous statement from a reading researcher, Christine Nuttall. What she says is, to enable students to enjoy, or at least feel comfortable with, reading in English, to enjoy reading in English, and to read without help, unfamiliar, authentic texts at appropriate speed, silently, and with adequate understanding. There are at least half a dozen important points that Nuttall's making here. So the easiest way of understanding what she's saying is to chunk it into meaningful units now. Look at the first chunk. We teach reading because we want to enable our students to read. Now, it might seem a rather silly thing to say, but think back on some of the occasions when you yourself did reading. Think about some of the teachers you might have had, in school in particularly, who taught you reading. And the temptation for some teachers at least is to say, look, you're going to find this text difficult, so I'll read it out sentence by sentence and explain it to you. The consequence is the teacher's comprehension increases, and there's no guarantee that the learner's reading comprehension has changed at all. So we're doing this to enable students to get involved in the process of reading. And the second bit, the chunk, is important too. The way we read will determine whether students go away enjoying the process of reading. Will they go away at least feeling comfortable with this process of reading? 3, to read without help. Now that's important because we're saying reading at its core is a highly individual task. Right? Now, all of you are adult readers. When you sit down to read something, there's nobody really around you. Right? Even when you're sitting in the library and you're surrounded by 20 others, the act of reading is a very lonely process. Right? It's an interaction between you and the text. So, I think it's important to encourage learners to learn to depend on themselves and not depend too much on their teachers. We're there, obviously, to help them to become better readers, to facilitate the process of reading. But at the end of the day, as good teachers, as successful teachers, we want to leave the classroom feeling that the learners can manage on their own. Now, what kind of texts should we enable our learners to read? By and large, in all our classrooms here, we have prescribed textbooks. And with our help, our learners go away understanding, we assume, large portions of the anthology. And the success of that understanding is revealed in a test or an exam that follows the act of reading. But in real life, you're not going to be reading a prescribed text. In real life, you're reading a whole lot of unfamiliar texts which are authentic in nature. So think back about the kind of textbooks you're using in your own classrooms. I'm not sure in any of your textbooks, for instance, there is a railway timetable extract. Right? Think about it. Those of us who travel by train, and many of us here might have actually traveled by train to Hyderabad, at some point or the other, you will have to consult a timetable. To read a railway timetable needs a specific kind of skill. So it's not good enough for us in the classroom to say we'll help you read Somerset Maugham with great clarity and enjoyment. Rest of the reading text that you might come across in real life is your problem. I'm teaching you Somerset Maugham because it's there in the textbook. So authenticity can extend from something like timetables to newspaper extracts to captions, right? To headings, to information contained in graphs, charts, maps. They all involve the process of reading. So newer textbooks, good textbooks in reading, will actually bring in a huge number of authentic texts. So you need to look at your own textbooks a little more critically. The speed at which you read obviously will depend on the text concerned and your own purpose for reading that text. We're going to come back to this in a moment. If you're sitting in a restaurant, for instance, and you want to order a masala dosa, and you have the menu lying in front of you, and you still haven't made up your mind because you don't know how expensive it is. So you open the menu, check the menu there, and say, the masala dosa is only 80 rupees, right? Actually, in a five-star hotel, it will be 800 rupees, right? So you better look at the price list first before you look at the items themselves. And you then put away the menu and you place your order and get on with life. So that kind of reading is extremely quick. It happens in a matter of seconds sometimes, at best, a couple of minutes. Right? But suppose you get a letter from your beloved, right? Even the ones who are married here, right? You're not only going to read it very slowly, right? You're going to read it several times, right? Trying to figure out what perhaps is not being stated explicitly. Because the first time she wrote to you, she said, "My dearest Paul." Then at some point it became "Dearest Paul." And finally, the most recent letter starts with Paul. So you read a whole lot of meaning into just that salutation. So your speed will depend crucially on the purpose for which you start reading in the first place and the kind of text you're reading. And as we said a little while ago, reading at our level, right? So to enable students to read silently and with adequate understanding, right? It's probably simplistic to believe that we can send students away with complete understanding, right? And thankfully, something like complete understanding doesn't really exist. Because if complete understanding did exist, it takes just one scholar, a Shakespearean scholar, for instance, to put together a book, and this has been attempted over the years, over the centuries, and say, this is what Shakespeare means in this particular play. And you're also hinting when you say that, you don't really have to go elsewhere to dig out any more meaning you might want. I've done it for you. Right? So no more research in Shakespeare. I've said it all. I've done it for you. Now that's obviously not the case, particularly in literature. So every generation, 400 years down the line, has continued to interpret and reinterpret Shakespeare. So this particular aim of a reading program is crucial to us when we begin to teach reading in our own classrooms. Next one, rather quickly. Why should we read? We can think of 3 reasons why we should read in the first place. And when we look at these 3 reasons, we're probably also going to be incidentally reminded of the unfortunate illiterates we have in societies all over the world. Right? What have they lost? What have they lost out? First reason, reading is a means of extending our command of the language concerned. So in our case, we're talking about English as the language concerned. So the more you read in English, the better your English is going to become. So there's lots and lots of research support for this, where the better readers are also better users of English in general. There's a positive correlation, therefore, between good reading and a good command of English. Small quotation there. The best way to improve your knowledge of a foreign language is to go and live among its speakers. The next best way is to read extensively in it. Right? And I think most of us have done the second thing, really. Right? We're living vicariously in England or US or South Africa, wherever, whichever kind of writer you pick up and read. A second reason for wanting to read, reading contributes most to self-dependence in learning. This again is important because successful readers, and you and I are successful readers, which is why we have reached this stage of professional success. It has happened because we've all over the years, over time, become independent, self-dependent readers. So in school, for instance, we tend to make a distinction between pupil and student. Right? Occasionally, teachers will say, he's a pupil because he continues to depend on me. And she look at another student and say, she's a student because she doesn't depend too much on me. So we're assuming that reading will make you independent of your teacher. So all of you who have done post-graduation and your PhDs, for instance, went about your research, your study, largely independent of your gurujis, right? You got help, obviously, about what to read, but at the end of the day, you sat down and read it for yourselves. Small quotation. Once students take charge of their own learning, they will find every reading experience liberating and empowering. Third reason, right. Third reason, reading should be valued not only as an educational tool, but as a source of enjoyment. So we're coming back to what Christine Nuttall said in her famous statement about reading and reading programs. Our learners must learn to enjoy the act of reading. They shouldn't feel they are obliged to read. You must want to pick up a book and read because you love reading. So good reading habits will get students hooked on books. That's your little quotation. The next component, I think, is important. What's reading? This question has been researched for decades and decades. But I've simplified it by reducing it to a traditional view of reading and a contemporary modern view of reading. Now, what's a traditional view? The traditional view says the reading text is the sole repository of meaning. In other words, the writer has put together a text, he has infused meaning into it, whatever he or she wanted to, and that meaning is lying there in the text for you and me as readers to decode. Right? Now, obviously, it doesn't seem too satisfactory because it's a one-way traffic. So the text seems to have everything that the writer has put in, and all that we have to do while reading that text is to get everything out of it in terms of what the writer originally wanted to include in the text. So it keeps you out of it, actually. Right? You're looking only at what the writer thinks he has passed on through the text. Obviously, it's not a very satisfactory explanation of reading. So, in the modern sense, we talk about reading texts having a potential for meaning. Just a potential for meaning. So, how does meaning emerge then? Through what the reader does. The reader breathes meaning into it. And in that sense, we're therefore saying reading is an active interrogation of the text. It's not just an interrogation, but it's a process in which the reader is actively participating. So it's an active interaction between the reader and the writer. The text is the intermediary. It's through the text that the reader and the writer are communicating. That's what we mean. Okay? Now, many years ago, seems like 200 years now, when I was in college in Bangalore, we invited R.K. Narayan to spend an afternoon with us. Don't believe it? Somebody called me Methuselah. So R.K. Narayan was kind enough to be with us one afternoon at National College. And discussion with my class, the BA Honours English students. Lovely interaction, very friendly person, right? At some point, one of my classmates asked him, we've all read the guide, right? But we're still not sure what happens at the end, right? Now, you're the writer, sir. You tell us what happened. So Narayan went into deep thought, right? And for a moment, we thought he had nodded off. But after a couple of minutes, he sat up and said, look, I don't know. You decide. Okay? In other words, it's the reader's choice to make sense of what he reads in the final analysis. Right? So you can read meaning into everything depending on what your own experiences are. And we're going to come to that in a moment with examples. Right? Which means it's now a two-way process between the text and the reader, right? Here the reader and the writer are genuinely interacting with each other through the text. And at best the writer says, this is what I think, but I can't stop you from making a different interpretation. And there have been attempts, by the way, as you know, in literature, for instance, in serious fiction, where writers just leave the ending out. And they explicitly tell you right at the beginning of the novel, you decide how the story should end or will end. Right? It's for you to decide. I don't know how to do it. Right? Okay. We'll skip this. This is an explanation. Wait, the second point is important. The first one is an elaboration of what I just said. So you don't have to look at it, the cooperative principle. But in the second one, where we read about interaction between top-down and bottom-up processing. Now that's important. When we talk about top-down processing of a reading text, we are talking about bringing our own experience, our own background knowledge, our own schema or schemas into operation when we are interacting with the text. And particularly with fiction, for instance, that's usually what happens. Feverishly, our own schemas are operating there, which influence the way we interpret that piece of writing. But with bottom-up processing, we are talking about what is actually there in print. So what is there in print obviously has meaning, right? It's sending out signals to you, like the item masala dosa and the price of the masala dosa in a menu card. You can't ignore it, right? But when you're looking even at the masala dosa item in a menu card and its price, it's both a combination of top-down and bottom-up. At its bottom-up level, it's just an item of food with its price. But you will, if you're sitting with a friend, you will say, this is only 75 rupees here. Yesterday I paid 110 rupees at the other restaurant. Right? So there the schema is taking over. Right? You want to interpret that little piece of information in terms of what has already transpired. Right? So earlier, according to the traditional view, reading was seen as simply bottom-up processing. You gave 100% currency, as it were, to the writer. This is what the writer is saying. This is what I think he's saying. I believe him. Full stop. Right? But with experience, we now know that that is not true always. We have to see reading as an interaction between schemas and bottom-up processing. Okay, quick word about schema before I show you a couple of examples. Now, the word schema is a technical word. It's been around for decades. Right? But in simple English, it means the background knowledge that we all carry in our minds. We have loads and loads of information and knowledge and experience that we carry with us, right? And all that can be seen as a combination of different kinds of schemas. So in that sense, a schema is a mental structure, right? It's something abstract. You can't see the kind of schemas I have in my mind, and I can't see the schemas operating in your minds. It is mental and abstract because it derives from our many experiences. And because it's a structure, it is organized. Now, on this course, in the few hours you've been here, already schema organization has begun to happen. You've been told lunch will not be served here, it will be served elsewhere. Right? So, tomorrow, you don't really have to be told where to go for lunch. That schema will take over. Right? But at 3:30, hopefully, with Jyoti's help, we'll get a cup of tea, right? Right here. And tomorrow at 3:30, you'll all begin to salivate and say, I can smell tea around the corner. Right? So these are little schemas for everything that operates inside our brains. And at the appropriate time, we pull out the schema that is applicable to the context. And because it's an organized structure, it keeps changing. Right? Because every time you operate one particular schema and something happens to make you use it slightly differently, the schema itself changes. Right? So, the worst that can happen to you all, for instance, and luckily it didn't, is to get to the railway station, let's say, and discover that the train has already left. Right? So you got your schema in terms of planning the journey to the railway station abysmally wrong. Right? So there'll be a modification of the schema which will tell you the next time you have to catch a train, get there 30 minutes early. Right? So reading makes use of existing schemas and modifies them. Now take a look at this little paragraph, please. The bus conductor careered along and ended up in the hedge. Several passengers were hurt. The driver was questioned by the police. Can somebody explain what's happened here? Yes, please. Yeah, go on. Whoever started.
Should be a bus driver possibly because the conductor wouldn't be careering along.
No, try not to change what's there. This is what is there in the original. This is the text. So you're saying the conductor cannot be a driver.
Yeah, maybe just the bus careered along and ended up with the edge without the conductor speaking English.
No, but it clearly says the bus conductor careered along. Who fell off the bus? No. Here, because the conductor is at the wheel, right, and somehow struggling to keep the vehicle moving, right, tottering along or whatever, the motion continues. Okay? Give me a name for this conductor or driver. Ramu. Okay. Any other name? Rajiv. Okay. First things first. In buses, even in India, in the cities, sometimes you have, particularly with double-decker buses, you have only one person at the wheel who also collects the bus fare. Okay? In the West, it's common. You can only enter the bus from the front, and as you get in, you tell the driver, I want this particular point, and you pay the fare. The fare is collected, and you then go and get a seat for yourself, right? So the person there is a conductor and a driver, right? This is the second part of that little extract. She was later congratulated on her quick thinking and skillful handling of the bus when the brakes failed. See, you all called him Rajiv and Ramu. So, your schema obviously suggests a lot about the way you look at reality. Why should the driver always be a man? That is the construct. Okay. Okay. Right? So it comes as a shock when you see the word she. Right? So that's schema operating there. And now it will modify your own schema. Right? Okay. 2 or 3 more examples. Look at this quickly, please. Have you heard of the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Have you? No? Anyone who's heard of the Leaning Tower of Pisa? You've seen photograph. What is special about it? Okay. Even at the time it was built, it tilted. But amazingly, for 500 years, it's just stayed in that position. Right? In Italy. Pisa in Italy. And what's Big Ben? Clock where? London. Where in London? Okay, it's in Parliament House, right? Right at the top of Parliament House. And it's become a symbol of the country, right? In many ways, Big Ben. Okay, what did the Leaning Tower of Pisa say to Big Ben? If you have the time, I have the inclination. Right? The most romantic thing I've ever heard. Right? Now, obviously, you'll enjoy this if you already have the background knowledge of the fact that person speaking is the Leaning Tower, right? And the whole business of the inclination, the tilt, is being brought into play here. And the addressee is Big Ben, which is a symbol of time, right? It's been restored now, by the way. For 2 years, it was being repaired, and terribly romantic statement. The royal proclamation was completed. The king sent for his seal. What is the seal here? Beg your pardon? Huh? You were doing this. I saw you doing this. Okay. So it's some kind of a stamp or seal, that's what you're saying, which authenticates whatever is on paper. In this case, it's the royal proclamation, and you think the king is sending for that little stamp to authenticate it, right? So that's your seal. If you have a third sentence like this, the king was feeling lonely. He sent for a seal. Which seal is this now? Right. Right. He sent for his pet seal. Right. Because only a silly, moronic kind of king will want to play with his stamp. I'm feeling lonely, so please bring me my seal, the stamp. I want to throw it up and down and relax as a result of it. Right? So, again, our interpretation of the meaning will depend crucially on how much we know of the particular context. Okay? How many of you pay income tax here? All of us. Now, that's a bit too much. I don't think all of you are paying income tax. You have to. Oh, so sad. Okay. 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 If you go to an income tax office, please don't, right? But if you are summoned and you have to go, in many offices, right at the entrance, very helpfully it will say, watch your step, right? Because they're very badly maintained, and you can go for a toss if you're not careful with the steps leading up or down there. So very useful piece of direction there. Watch your step. You go into the income tax, you do your work, right? And then you leave. You come out of the exit. And at the exit, you see this. Watch your language. Okay? So having paid up all your arrears, right? You're screaming murder. You come out cursing everybody around. So watch your language. Right? So the famous statement, Lichtenberg statement is, a book is a mirror. If an ass peers into it, you can't expect an apostle to look out. Right? So you're only as good as your own experience. Okay. Aman, can we give this out? Leave them here if you want. Read it? Okay. Could you go straight to question number 9? What's the answer? On hearing the good news, Mrs. Batliwala must have felt disappointed. Angry and disappointed. Not proud and happy. Happy. You think happy? Okay. Okay, let's listen to his reason. Yes. Why do you think she must have felt happy? Sit and talk.
The cost of the tea may be high.
Beg your pardon?
The cost of the tea.
No. We assume went to buy a packet of tea, not a whole carton, 2-kilo carton of tea, right?
The packet of the tea may be made of gold.
I'd like to actually study your schema now.
Because that's the way she wanted to hear that from the manager that
That's all it mattered. So you don't think she was disappointed. So that's the second happy. Why did you think that she must have felt disappointed?
she has been buying things, unwanted things, and dumping everything inside her kitchen.
No, she
She's
wanted
waiting for the days she could get everything for free.
everything for free.
Okay.
The maximum things that she
So what did she get free that day then?
Only a tea box.
Couple of things.
That too, previously she
Packet
came
of
and
tea.
bought the whole thing, cart full of things, and she didn't get anything. But when she came back, remembering that she forgot to get tea packet, she gets this tea.
Okay. A few years ago, we administered this to a group of students in a junior college in a village, right? In the interior of Andhra Pradesh, right? uniformly, the answer that every student, and I think there were about 55 in the class, they said happy. And some of them said proud and happy. Now think about why that happened and why most of you here think it's disappointment and anger. Okay? Okay, now what do we mean by background knowledge? Thank you. No. No. What happens at a supermarket? Right? Most or all of you, exactly, that's what I'm going to explain. Most or all of you have been to supermarkets, right? Wherever you are from. And typically what happens at a supermarket is you walk towards the entrance, and before you enter or immediately inside, there is a kind of left luggage counter, right? Where you leave any big bag or bags that you might be carrying, a bottle of water, whatever, right? And you enter the supermarket only with your wallet or a little handbag, right? And when you enter, you pick up a basket, a shopping basket, or a trolley, right? And you go from shelf to shelf, depending on what you want, and you take your own time deciding what you want to buy and how much of what you want to buy, right? Nobody's rushing you. You have an entire morning, if you want to buy 10 little things in a supermarket, right? And the bigger the supermarket, the longer it's going to take. So you put stuff into your trolley, and that's precisely what Mrs. Batliwala did that morning. She didn't need any of the things she put into the trolley, the basket, sorry, in this particular case. And having filled up the basket, she walks towards the exit, right? In typical supermarkets, you have an entrance and an exit. Now, as she's approaching the cashier's desk, which is near the exit, the manager sitting in his little glass cubicle has been watching her, right? And at the appropriate time, he bounces out of his office, comes to Mrs. Batliwala, familiar figure, because she's there every day buying stuff she doesn't need, making the supermarket richer, and goes up to her and says, "Madam, I want to congratulate you. You are our lucky customer, and everything you have in your basket is free." Knowing there's only a packet of tea there, a 250-gram packet of tea. Right? Now, think about what has already happened. Right? I conflated the two. Right? Well, that's not what happened. She shops in the first round, picks up a whole lot of stuff she doesn't need, puts it into the basket, keeps looking over her shoulder in the direction of the manager's cabin. No signs of anything nice happening. So she goes to the cashier, pays for all that she has in the basket, and exits. Right? Only after she gets into the street, she realizes, oh, actually, I needed a packet of tea. So what did she do? She came back to the entrance. She could have carried what she'd bought already into the supermarket. You're not allowed to. So she leaves everything at the entrance, picks up another basket, rushes to the tea shelf, picks up a packet of 250 grams tea, Lipton tea, puts it into the basket, rushes to the cashier's desk, only to be stopped by the manager, the clever, intelligent manager, who says, "Everything in your basket is free, madam. You are our lucky customer for the day." That's what happened. The village students did not know what a supermarket is. was about 20 years ago. Right? They had no knowledge of what a supermarket is. They were only used to the kirana shop nearby, where you go there and you're cut off, remember, from the inside of the shop. Standing outside the shop, you tell the man, the shopkeeper, I want some tea, please. Right? He picks up whatever brand you want, gives it to you, pay for it, and you leave. You can't stand there endlessly looking at the packet of tea before you buy it, because you're going to come in the way of the next customer. So background knowledge of a supermarket was sorely missing in this particular case I mentioned. Now this is important because if you look at this passage, it's in simple English. Right? There's nothing difficult in terms of language. There isn't anything difficult, if you think about it, in terms of content for somebody who knows how supermarkets function. But for somebody who doesn't know anything about a supermarket, the simple English is going to make no difference to that person's understanding. So don't underestimate the value of background knowledge when you're teaching. So when a student looks a little perplexed at something you think is straightforward, try and figure out what the problem might be. Okay, put that away there. I'll skip a couple of things. Okay, quick word about purpose and strategy. I referred to it already. When your purpose for reading is to obtain information, the chances are your reading speed is going to be slow, and your strategy is going to be one of extreme caution and carefulness. And this is what happens when you are involved in what we call accuracy reading or intensive reading. So typically, in an English exam, which is based on the prescribed textbook, your learners are going to try and learn up everything there is about a set of stories you're going to test them on, because they don't know which detail in that particular story is going to be tested. And the chances are they're going to be preparing for the test, reading everything carefully and slowly, because it's for an exam that is about to happen. But if the purpose is pleasure, if you're going to read something not for an exam, but because you want to read something pleasurable, the chances are that your reading speed will be considerably faster. And because it's faster, the chances are you may not be as careful with what you read. Right? So it might be a longish story which captures your attention from the first paragraph, but you keep going along, and at some point or two, maybe there are a couple of words you don't understand, but it doesn't stop you because you want to get on with the story. So you carry on and finish the story. So you pay less care, as it were, for pleasure. And this is what we do when it comes to fluency reading or extensive reading. Do you want to, is that a tea bell? It's a tea bell. Okay. We'll take a 10-minute break if you don't mind. Right? Right? It shouldn't take you longer than 10 minutes to have a cup of tea, please. Right? You already delayed me by half an hour. So, are we ready? Okay. We're going to do a little more on reading. Four kinds of reading, and these labels are useful because it will help you understand which part of your own reading program falls under one or more of these categories that I'm going to list for you. Firstly, scanning. And what is scanning? Louder? Looking at something at a glance. Why should you glance at something? Just headline reading. No? Louder. Looking at the details. Looking at for a specific piece of information. Uh-huh. So, are you going to read fast or are you going to read slowly? Very. You haven't thought about it. Okay. You're right. Glancing rapidly through a text, either to locate a specific piece of information or get an initial impression of whether the text is suitable for a given purpose. Now look at that statement and identify the definite and the indefinite articles in that. How many definite articles and how many indefinite articles there are? One definite article, the text, four indefinite articles. Okay. Now that is scanning. Okay? I asked you to locate a specific piece of information. You got to it in a few seconds. That's it. So typically, when you are looking through or looking at, let's say, a telephone directory. Remember the good old days when we had telephone directories, right? When landline connections were the only mode of communication, telecommunication, right? We used to fight with the telecom authority to get our copy of a directory because everything you needed was in that directory, including the yellow pages. Now, of course, we don't have anything like that. Life's changed. And when we used to use the telephone directory, and you needed to know the telephone number of Sharma, ML Sharma, the easiest thing was to go straight to the S section, to the Sharma section, and there'll be 150 Sharmas there. But your trained eye will go down and spot ML Sharma. There'll be a number alongside it. You make a note of the number, shut the telephone directory, and get on with your work. Right? But I did know of a person, right? I've lost touch with him in Bangalore, who would religiously try and memorize one page of the directory every day. He said he kept his brains active. I still don't understand how that could be, but I never dissuaded him. So that was an abuse of scanning. So scanning is simply looking at something rapidly to get the information you require, and you then get on with the next stage of the activity. What is skimming? Obviously, it's different. That looks like a Saurav Ganguly drive to the square leg. What is skimming? Reading fast. Do you read fast or do you read slowly? Okay, good, good. So skimming is, again, reading a text rapidly, glancing rapidly through a text to determine its gist, to get an overview of what the text is all about, so that you can either decide to read that text or the book or whatever slowly, because it's suitable for your own purpose, or you shut the book, put it away, and look for something else. You do this in bookshops. You certainly do this in libraries. Right? So titles can be misleading. You want to consult a contemporary book of English grammar, and on the shelf there'll be a book staring at you saying contemporary English grammar. So you grab it, open it, but somehow something seems wrong with the first few pages, till your common sense kicks in and says, check the publication date, and it'll say 1921. Obviously, it was contemporary 100 years ago, right? So you tell yourself, this is not worth reading. You put that book away and look for something that is truly contemporary. All that is skimming, because you want to get an overview. Okay? Take a look at this text. Read it quickly. I asked you to read it quickly. Remember, skimming. Now, what's the title? A Good Detective. That's right. So, when you're looking at this, when you're looking at this particular text, it's possible that you don't know the meaning of a certain word or an expression, but that doesn't matter. What matters when you're skimming is, did I get a general idea what the text is about? So you may not even know who Sherlock Holmes really was, but it doesn't matter. You'll still arrive, hopefully, at the right title, right overview. Okay, so that is an example of skimming. The third and the fourth kinds of reading, and this is probably the most important kind of reading, intensive reading. And this, I think, is what all of you actually teach in your classrooms. Please note, approaching a text under the guidance of a teacher. So generally speaking, intensive reading happens in an educational institution, school or college or university, because that's where you have teachers. Right? So it's teacher guided, teacher supervised reading, and the teacher's job, as it is in your case, is to help your learners understand as much as is possible or is required of the text that has been prescribed. We call it an accurate understanding of the text. We'll come to that in a moment. Something related to intensive reading, but quite different really, is the last kind of reading, extensive reading. So you read some texts intensively and you read some others extensively. Now, as the word suggests, it's reading a lot of material much more than is prescribed in an anthology for intensive reading. And importantly, you read most or all of it independent of the teacher. And what's the purpose of extensive reading in general? There are different purposes. We're short-circuiting everything. It's to get the general overall idea of the text or texts, and you do it basically for enjoyment. Because there's a joy inherent in reading extensively. And as we said at the beginning of the session, those learners who read extensively, and in the other sense of extensively, read lots and lots, tend to be better users of English in general. They're better speakers, they're better listeners, they're better writers. Which is why I said there's a positive correlation between reading lots and lots on your own and being a good user of English. Okay. Now for a couple of technical points, and I think this is where the actual teaching happens. Reading comprehension. All of you, I'm sure, have dealt with, are dealing with, day after day, a series of comprehension questions that follow a text. And the text might be a short story, an essay, an article from a newspaper, a poem, a one-act play, an extract from a longer play, we don't know what. But they all will have something called comprehension. Because the general idea of the textbook writer, and you as a teacher, is to figure out how much of the text has been assimilated by the learner in terms of meaning. But if you look carefully at the questions, and I'm now talking about good comprehension questions, you'll see layers of comprehension being attacked for the benefit of the learner. And we use familiar but technical words. These have been around for a long time. The first is what you call factual comprehension. Think about the word factual. So what do you think factual comprehension refers to? Beg your pardon? Okay. Okay. So there is no scope, as it were, for two interpretations. Right? When it comes to understanding the facts of a text. So if you look at a medicine bottle, for instance, a tonic bottle, a bottle of tonic, I shouldn't say tonic bottle, a bottle of tonic, right? It will say, take a spoonful 3 times a day after meals. If the doctor has told you, please stick to the instruction on the bottle I've given you, you better stick to it. You can't now go into a reverie, as it were, and try and figure out what that word spoonful, for instance, means. What does a meal mean? Is dinner and supper the same thing? Do both count as meals? I have a brunch. I don't have breakfast and lunch. Does that count as a meal? You don't ask silly questions like that. You simply do what the doctor has told you through that little statement. Right? Because you're dealing with facts. And generally, as I said, generally, there's only one interpretation. Which is why we call it the understanding of information explicitly stated in the text. It's in black and white. To use figurative language, we call this reading the lines. Reading them as they are. But there is a second kind of comprehension which we call inferential comprehension. What do you think this means? Schema and all, but you need to tell me a little more what you have in mind. What kind of understanding is this?
Background influences. What do you infer with all the background influences?
So the
Infer
background knowledge
Yeah. What do you infer?
comes into play much more here than in factual. Beg your pardon, sir? Arriving at a conclusion based on what? Based on something explicitly mentioned? Thank you. So drawing conclusions from information not explicitly stated in the text. So you can straight away see that the challenge has increased. The reading challenge. So the argument is, generally, that factual comprehension is the easiest, and everything else being equal, all or most students will get questions that appear under factual comprehension right, but not every student will get the answers to questions under inferential comprehension right. Reason? This is reading between the lines. So what is only implied, what is only implicitly mentioned, just suggested, you work on what that might mean and you come to your own conclusion. A third kind of comprehension is what we call evaluative comprehension. Now, as the word evaluative suggests, it's an evaluation of character, plot, structure, and so on. So when you assess character, when you assess the structure of a particular piece of writing, you're trying to figure out what its value is in terms of evaluation. So in the simplest sense, when we teach our little children stories, not teach, tell them stories, our own little children, right, 3 years old, 4-year-old children, etc., we largely talk about stories where there is a good person and a bad person, and invariably the good person wins and the bad person loses. So at the very beginning, life is either black or white. And children begin to learn as they go along that life isn't simply black and white, it's full of gray. But at the very beginning stages, they learn to appreciate what the hero stands for, and they begin to learn to detest what the villain stands for. Right? So it's good over evil. And we carry this forward into adult reading. Right? And when we are reading the same texts as adults, in the original, let's say, different interpretations happen because of our own background. So not surprisingly,
because the Ram Mandir is in the news now, you have a section of specialists, fiction, literary specialists, who will swear by Ravana, right? Thereby making the Rama devotees very angry. Right? But that is evaluation. But at the earliest stages, remember, we don't give young children, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, a choice. That child is brought up to believe that Rama did the right thing by getting rid of Ravana. So if you have different kinds of Ramayana, different interpretations of the Mahabharata, for instance, a lot of it is based on what the writer thinks of the character that he or she is dealing with. And that is very clearly what our learners begin to do with us at our bidding. So, important lesson for us there is, when it comes to evaluative comprehension, it's best not to foist our own preferences on the class. You have to be very careful, right? Because if you say very, very strongly, right, that so-and-so is a villainous character, right, you might be in trouble. Because another reading might suggest that that isn't always the case. So good teachers, particularly at the more advanced levels, will leave it to the learners to make sense of what they're reading. You lay a set of options open for the learners to choose from. And by extension, evaluative comprehension is excellent for teaching because it promotes a lot of discussion. But it may not be a good testing weapon. Right? So if you're made up in your mind already that Shylock deserves to be thrashed, flogged, in fact killed, for being the merciless Jew he was, then you better not a character sketch question on Shylock, because you might have 10 students telling you a very different story. So if you are trained to accept different perspectives, include it in your exam. But if you're not, stay away from evaluation. Right? That's the wrong thing for a teacher trainer to say, but I've seen over the years that teachers fall into their own trap. Right? Because they expect to see what they have passed on to the classroom. The same thing happens when you come to the fourth kind of comprehension, which is extrapolative comprehension. Extrapolative comes from the verb extrapolate. When you extrapolate something from something else. So you deduce meaning, as it were, from what you're reading, depending on your own personal perspective. So you personalize responses to the text under extrapolative comprehension. Now see how far, you see how far we've come from, thank you, from factual comprehension. Right? Where there was no problem. If the text says New Delhi is the capital of India, it is. That's all there is to it. Right? But should we pull down Lutyens' Delhi and build a completely Indian Delhi there? That's a matter of discussion. So when you're moving closer and closer to inference, evaluation, and extrapolation, you're going further and further away from what is written in print, because here you're actually reading beyond the lines. And your schema is therefore working full time here.
So how you interpret a text finally will depend crucially on what your own perspective is in that particular context. So particularly with sacred texts, right? There's a lot of debate all the time in all religious communities because there are different interpretations possible of what is there, and a lot of it has to do with the person's personal experience or choice. Right? And again, word of warning, if you want a personalized response to a question in an exam, be prepared to be shocked by some of the answers. Right? And be prepared to accept them as valid responses. If you're not an open-minded person, do not ask extrapolative questions. Work on them in the classroom, but don't bring it into a written test. Right? I'll give you a little example. A classmate of mine, this was in senior Cambridge, 200 years ago, right? He topped the ISC English, the senior Cambridge English exam, and in the first year of compulsory English graduation, he failed. Because that particular paper, I still remember looking at it, he was so shocked, he didn't know how to make sense of it, was actually all about extrapolation. So Harthiv went to town, giving it such a personal interpretation, it seemed completely removed from the original. And that poor teacher obviously couldn't make sense of what Harthiv was writing, and marked him F. Out you go this semester, right? Or retake the exam. So it can happen because we ourselves are not prepared for openness in the classroom. We talk about freedom of speech and all that, but do we actually encourage it in the classroom? And do we encourage it in the exam? It's something that we need to think about. Yes, ma'am.
We had a question which was poetry comprehension. One of the poems that was given was Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. And the interpretation I got was it is about Project Tiger.
Aha. Okay.
I wasn't open-minded to that, to that extent.
Yeah. No, but it depends on what the question was.
It was to interpret the poem.
Okay. Again, I don't know. You need to be very careful about the wording, right?
Interpret the poem and interpret the poem. That is the basic.
Yeah. No, now that is the problem. The problem is with the word interpret.
But even using Project Tiger as an interpretation, it didn't really convey or was it convincing enough in the argument?
I agree. I agree. The best response, obviously, in that context would be for the learner, the student, to establish a link between the main thesis of the poem, right, and its current value in Indian society. 2,967 tigers only in the wild. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Because you can get away by writing about tigers without reading the poem. That's what you're saying. Okay, fine. Okay. Last comprehension, kind of comprehension, global comprehension. Global is the opposite, technically speaking, of the word local. Local comprehension as opposed to global comprehension. At the local level, you're asking learners, for instance, in the first sentence of the story, what is the writer trying to represent? Right? What is he trying to portray? And so on. So the reader's mind is focused on the opening line, as opposed to the teacher asking the class, what is this story about?
So you have to read not only the opening sentence, but every other sentence that follows, and take an overview of what happens in the text. So getting an overview of the text means operating global comprehension. Simple example. Suppose Romeo and Juliet is the play I teach at the MA level, let's say, right? I go through every scene, every line, sometimes very laboriously, but I spend a whole year dealing with Romeo and Juliet. And I then give them a quiz at the end of the year. And I ask questions like, in line so-and-so, scene so-and-so, act so-and-so, what is the speaker referring to? And all the responses are correct. Right? And I then ask them an oral question, right, friends, is Romeo and Juliet a tragedy? And the whole class stares at you and does this. That would be a tragedy. So I'd rather have a class of students who understand, let's say, 75% of the play, but need my help to understand the remaining 25%, rather than somebody who understands 100% of all the details and yet misses the main point of the text. Which is why, in good comprehension questions, global comprehension question will either appear right at the beginning to find out if the class has understood the main purpose of that particular story or text, or it will appear right at the end. Right? So this is an extremely good question to use in a classroom to separate those students who deal basically and are very good at factual comprehension, and those who are able to read between the lines, read beyond the lines, and actually get a perfectly acceptable overview of the text. Okay, let's look at one. Can we have that one? Very quickly, as an example of what we're doing just now. Please read this handout and look at the 5 choices provided there. Choose one, please, either in consultation with your friend or by yourselves. Does anyone need a copy? Any choices? You've got choice. Number 4, you're going to remove the student from the exam hall and explain to the class the reason for doing so. So you're going to do this publicly. Okay, no, I'm getting some clarity about what you're saying. So Paul has been cheating, right? You catch Paul in the act and you say, out you go. You're not allowed to cheat in my exam. And you then look at the class and see, did you see what I did to Paul? Beware. The same thing will happen to you if you try to cheat. Okay? That's number 4. You, gentlemen? 3. You'll take away the notes he's been copying from and then tell the class, look, I won't give you the name, but one of your classmates has been cheating. Right? Please remember the rule. If you are caught cheating,
you'll be debarred from the exam. But that's all you do. But you don't throw Paul out. No, Paul's been cheating quite regularly. Anyway. Okay. Okay. Any other choices?
Quietly asked him to stop filling the.
Beg your pardon? Number two. Okay. Okay. You just go and whisper in Paul's ears. Look, I know what you're up to. Please don't do it. Put those nasty notes away and try and do it on your own. Good boy. Give him a pat, honestly. And okay. Very kind father, I assume. Okay. Any other choice? Three, okay. Aha. Okay. So no public humiliation. That's the maternal instinct at work. I can see that. So none of you will choose number 5. And none of you will choose 1. Your moral standards are very high, I notice, okay? Okay. When I began teaching, that's again 195 years ago, right? I'm trying to be a little more accurate now. I had to do my first round of invigilation in this college in Bangalore, and largish hall, larger than this hall, and they were all third-year BSc students doing a physics exam. Right? Deliberately, that college sent non-specialists to invigilate so that we couldn't help our favorite students if we wanted to. So I distributed the question paper, and they all settled down, began working on it, and I picked up one more from the collection and began looking at it, trying to figure out what the hell is physics all about, right? So I was holding it in my hand like this and standing under a ceiling fan. At some point, I let go of the piece of paper, right? Didn't realize what was happening. It sailed away and fell at the feet of a very pretty 18-year-old girl in a sari. So I walked up to her there and I said, can I have that paper, please? So she lifted the sari up to her knee, pulled out a wad of notes that she had hidden there, gave them to me. I said, thank you very much. Now can I have that paper? So who says women don't cheat? Gentlemen? Okay. Suppose you had a story with the title, The Abraham Prize. What do you think this story might be about? Beg your pardon? An excerpt from the Bible. About Abraham, you mean? But what's the connection between Abraham and a prize?
Something that you've been waiting for a long time.
Something that you've been waiting for a long time.
You are gifted with.
Okay.
Biblical reference.
Oh, it's again you're saying there's a biblical. Aha.
Prize instituted by Abraham.
Oh, prize instituted by somebody called Abraham. Which Abraham? Must be pretty old if it's the Abraham they have in mind. Okay. Anything else? Good. Yes?
Prize received by Abraham Lincoln.
If it is either a prize named after Abraham Lincoln or something that he received, I think you'd call it the Lincoln Prize. You'd use the surname, not the first name. Right? Okay. Any other choice? It's about a man.
Who might have improved his appearance
Okay, you're getting closer. You- But what's the prize for then?
The guy who made a drastic improvement to his appearance.
Okay. Are you suggesting he ended up looking like Abraham or something?
He did something that,
To his appearance.
to his appearance,
Aha.
that rewarded him the way that Abraham Lincoln was rewarded with the beard and the tall hat.
Oh, so you're making a Lincoln connection now.
Yeah, that is.
Okay. Okay, let's find out from a real story that's called the Abraham Prize. What the story is all about. Right. How many of you have finished? Finished. What did you think of the story? It's not complete? Why do you think it's not complete? Beg your pardon? There's no conclusion in the story? So why do you want to give your own conclusion? There is.
Maybe he was trying to show to the investigator that this handwriting is different from the one
Aha.
that is on the paper.
Okay. You want to say something?
Again the same thing. The boy who Jesus wrote with a pen, and the other boy was not cheating, wrote with a pencil.
So Inky wrote with a pen, Choi wrote with a pencil. That's the conclusive evidence.
He was biting the pencil. He was biting the pencil.
So are you suggesting the story is not complete?
No, story is complete. The moment he looked at the pen,
So how do you think this ends then? How does the story end then?
God got an idea to prove his innocence.
Okay, so the old man, the encounter with the old man gives him an idea about how to get out of trouble and prove his innocence. That's what you're saying. Okay.
The teacher failed to cross-check. That old man was patient enough to ask him, can you prove?
So you think he went back, is it? You would want him to go back and meet the class teacher and explain that it's all a matter of misunderstanding. So please look at the two scripts. One is in pencil and one is in pen. And therefore I'm in the clear. And then what does the teacher do then? Or the teacher will allow him to write? No. Okay. But it all happens in about 15 minutes. The encounter, etc. Okay. 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 Yeah. Jyoti? Yeah. Yeah, take some. Gentlemen? Wow, you all should go into film production. Okay. I want answers only to one or two questions. Look at the first one. The title is the Abraham Prize. Can you think of another title? The Impatient Teacher. I heard you. Okay. Anything else? The pen is mightier than the pencil. The other way around. The pencil is mightier than the pen. Okay. Anything else? Beg your pardon? Any other? One more choice?
The innocent boy and old man.
The innocent boy and the old man. Okay? Honesty pays. Okay? One more. A hasty decision. Okay. So that's from the teacher's perspective. Okay. Okay. Now, in answering this question, which of the 5 types of comprehension were you operating? Was it extrapolation? Was it the second one? The last one. You were trying to take, right, a global view of the text. And that's what titles generally do. Right? They tend to capture the essence of the text. Otherwise, nothing stops you from saying, why Choi? Right? And the story is about why Choi. Say, why Choi? Right? Or cheating doesn't pay, honesty pays, etc. Any of those choices are obviously possible. Okay? Let's think of number 8. What might have happened if Wai Choi had not noticed the pen in the old man's pocket? Who would have realized what? That he wouldn't have gone back, and as a result, he couldn't have won the prize. Okay, okay. Beg your pardon? Okay. Okay, that's fine. What about question number 5? Do you think Wai Choi always rode his bicycle with his head down? How do we know? How do we know? No, it says there, he got on his bicycle and rode very slowly along the road with his head down. It says there. That day. Ah. Because he was upset, sad, etc. So, the writer does not say, generally, Wai Choi rode with his head up, right? And he rode his cycle much faster and always looked at what was approaching him and avoided all accidents. But on this particular day, does he say all that? No. So look at the kind of inferring we're doing as readers. We're filling in all the gaps now. Right? Last question. Number 9. Do you think Wai Choi should have told the teacher that it was Inky who had written the note? No. First, think of the context. I'm not saying your answer is wrong. Inky throws a piece of paper in which there is a question towards Wai Choi. Wai Choi picks it up, opens it, discovers that he's being asked to supply an answer, right? And he's quite upset that his friend is trying to cheat, right? So he crumbles the piece of paper and throws it back in the direction of Inky. At that point, the teacher sees what's happening. So he picks up the piece of paper, opens it, and says, what's the answer to question 11, is it?
Yeah.
Question 11.
Sir, had White Boy not paid attention towards that, whatever that Pramod
No, wait. Hang on. At that point, the teacher says, Wai Choi, I saw you throwing this piece of paper. Looks like you want to cheat, right? You're asking Inky for help. I can't have that happening in my class. Please go away. Go out of the class. Right. At that particular point, you think Wai Choi should have said, Sir, I didn't write this note. Inky did.
If you had said so,
Ah.
the title wouldn't have been.
No. We are asking, should he have done this?
Maybe it could have said, I didn't write the note.
You think he should have said, I.
Stop pointing on
Okay. So he should have told the teacher, look, I didn't write it. I don't know who wrote it. But he will not mention Inky as the culprit, his name as the culprit. Why not? Friend. What would you do? What would you have done if you had been in Wai Choi's position? What would you have done?
In the open class, but later I would have met the teacher and told him that that is not my fault, somebody wrote my.
That means you will be kicked out. You go away and come back the next day and say, sir, you made a horrible mistake. That's not going to happen. You would have done that, is it? Now see what you're trying to do. You're extrapolating from what you've read. You're now thinking about what you could have done yourselves, what you should have done yourselves in that particular context. So you're personalizing your response to what you've just read. So even with a simple story, and I deliberately chose a very simple story, it's possible to play around with levels of comprehension, right? So the next time you deal with comprehension, please be careful. Every question in a good textbook has a value, right? A good textbook. I have to underline that, right? So get to the bottom of the thing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Before we briefly look at vocabulary, while I'm setting it up, I'd like you to look at this one, please. Just here. What would you have done if you had been in the father's position? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
The father is a non-believer.
Ah.
Question of praying
That's an act of evasion. You're avoiding the problem.
Sir,
Yes.
he says he will pray for it to rain all night and not rain in the daytime. Yes. Sir, they are living in different villages, no?
Ah.
We can pray for it.
Okay. Now, this is an example of critical reading. Right? It's a simple story. Right? But it really has no answer. Right? So at the end of the day, we want our learners to think about what they're reading.
And also to realize there aren't easy answers to every question. So that's the kind of lesson we want to pass on through a story like this. This, of course, we could have explored in a different fashion. Okay. A truncated session on words. So when you talk about the teaching of vocabulary, actually we need to be thinking about three aspects of word knowledge and the pedagogy of word knowledge. Where do words come from? What does knowing a word mean? And then how do we teach words? Right? We're not going to be able to look at everything. So let's just take one point from the first question, one aspect of question number 1. Where do words come from? The first person to ask this question was a philosopher, a linguist called Otto Jespersen. You may have read Jespersen, some of you, working in the area of linguistics in particular, right? So Jespersen asked this question, where do words come from? That was a good 120 years ago, right? And he had 4 ways of answering it. He said by adding to them, by subtracting from them, by making them up, and by doing nothing to them. Right? But Bill Bryson, I hope you've read Bill Bryson, and I strongly suggest you do, prolific writer on a variety of topics, areas, wonderful sense of English. And Bill Bryson, in a very famous book called Mother Tongue, expanded Jespersen's 4 answers to 5. So he said, firstly, words are created by error. Why did he say this? According to the first supplement of the Oxford English Dictionary, right, it's about 300 years ago, 250 to 300 years ago, there are at least 350 words in English dictionaries that owe their existence to typographical errors. Right? One example that he gives is the word messuage, M-E-S-S-U-A-G-E, or messuage, 2 syllables. It's a legal term that means describing a house, its land, and its building, right? Or buildings. Now, messuage is thought to be, quite simply, a careless transcription of the French word ménage. Because in ménage, this meaning fits. So Bryson reminds us that erroneous words are sometimes introduced by respected users of the language who simply make a mistake. Good old Shakespeare thought illustrious, the word illustrious, was the opposite of lustrous. Right? And for a long time gave it a sense that wasn't justified, obviously. Right? And of course, those of you from Chennai, how many from Chennai? Okay, 6 or 7 of you from Chennai will have heard about Barber's Bridge. If you haven't heard about it, you're too young. Right? Barber's Bridge was built by a Britisher engineer called Barber, and therefore rightly it was named after him, called the Barber's Bridge. Now, but that is not the story. The story is that it was actually built by an engineer called Hamilton. Okay? So the Hamilton Bridge came into being as a result of the engineering skills of this particular person, Hamilton. And since the local Tamilians couldn't always say Hamilton, they ended up saying Hamilton without the her. And at some point it became Amiton and then Amberton. And about 30 or 40 years ago, some bright spark noticed it and said, how can you have an Amberton Bridge, right? I suppose the Englishman who built it had barber in mind, right? Amberton means barber. So he christened it Barber's Bridge. Hunter. That's right. Right. Now these are all apocryphal in nature. We don't know that these things happened, right? But clearly, you make a mistake and it sticks because you're an important person. Right? So we won't look at, right? I'll try and send you something later. Maybe number 4 there. Words change, just an example for words change by doing nothing. Strange, isn't it? That a word changes when nobody has kind of tinkered with it, certainly not tampered with it. Now what does that mean? Counterfeit. Heard of the word counterfeit, right? So a lot of counterfeit currency notes are now circulating, apparently, on the Punjab border, all printed in Pakistani presses, right? Now, the word counterfeit actually once meant a legitimate copy. Now, it's quite the opposite, right? Brave, the word brave, once implied cowardice. Manufacture, the word manufacture, once signified something made by hand. Right? Now it means virtually the opposite. It's all factory made, the word manufacture. And politician, the word politician, was originally a sinister word. Still is, isn't it? Okay. Okay. I'm going to do just 4 or 5 of these items. Why? At the heart of teaching vocabulary, we all need to understand what knowing a word means. So, very often, you might have been asked, do you know this word? And you either say yes, or you say, no, I don't know. I think I've heard it before, I've seen it in print, but I'm not quite sure what it means. Right? But is that all we know about word knowledge? Right? What do we mean, for instance, when we say, oh, that chap has lots and lots of words in his word hoard. He knows about 75,000 words. What does that mean? So, knowing a word means several things. And I'll just go through a few of them in the few minutes we have now. Let's begin at the beginning. When you say, I know this word, what you're saying is, I've seen it in print, or I've heard it. So you recognize it, and in that sense, you know the word. But do you really know the word? right? Simply because you recognize it as an English word, does it mean you know what it means? Knowing a word means to know how it is spelled. So if you're going to use English in the written form, it's assumed you know the spellings of the words you're going to write. Okay? Here's a pair of words. Which of them is spelled correctly? The second one. Why? Beg your pardon? Why is the first one wrong? E is missing. E is missing. I see. Everyone agrees that the first one is wrong and the second one is right? Or you think the first one is right? Okay, let's look at a second pair. Which spelling is right? The second one. Both, is it? Okay. The second judgment is right. And the second jewelry is right. Which one? Omelette also second. Okay. Quick thing. I brought the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary so that don't do it now, don't worry, we don't have the time. So you could actually look at the Bible and check if you're getting it right. Judgment without an E and with an E are both right. Judgment without an E actually is the preferred choice in legal writing. Okay? So when the Supreme Court issues its verdict, hopefully in November, on the Ram Mandir dispute, Ram Mandir Babri Masjid dispute, there'll be a judgment without the E. Okay? Not that judgment with an E is wrong. Okay? So some aspects of specialization seem to prefer one or the other spellings given a choice. Jewelry, the first one and the second one are both acceptable. Right? So please don't argue that jewelry with only one L is 18 karat gold and the other one is 22 karat. Okay. Omelette with two T's and one T are both acceptable, right? So the first one is not a single egg omelette and the second one a two egg omelette, right? They're perfectly acceptable. So the lesson is, when you're looking at your learners' writing, don't be in a hurry to pick up your red pen and circle what you think are errors of spelling. Keep a dictionary on your table. When in doubt, check it. Okay? So be very, very careful. Spelling is not as simple as it appears. Knowing a word, sorry, this is just an example. Okay? Don't take it down. A poem called The Porcupine. Rebecca Jane, a friend of mine, went out to pat a porcupine. She very shortly came back in, disgusted with the porcupine. One never ever should, said Jane, go out and pat a porcupine. Okay? It's a play of words, right? spelling for you, deliberately misspelled for a literary purpose. Knowing a word means knowing how it is pronounced. Okay? Can somebody pronounce the first word for me? Louder. Pristine and pristine. How many for pristine? Okay, how many for pristine? How many think I don't know? No, it's pristine. Like Christine, the name Christine. They're all, the first three words are I-N-E endings. Okay, next one. Beg your pardon? Clandestine. Anything else for that? It's always clandestine. Well, it's either clandestine or clandestine. Okay? So you can have a clandestine meeting with your girlfriend. Right? A clandestine meeting or a clandestine meeting. Okay, third one? Intestine. So you go to any Indian doctor's cabin. If there's a problem with that particular organ, he's going to say, have an ultrasound done straight away, sir. Right. So it's intestine. Is it? No, it isn't. It's intestine. Intestine is India's contribution to world knowledge. Okay? But word of warning, next time you meet your own doctor and he says intestine, large or small, don't correct him because he'll remove both. Okay? So you need to know who to correct and when you should be doing this. So it's intestine, but intestinal. So I'm telling you what the accepted native speaker pronunciation is. Fourth word, premise. Well, it's premise. So that disappoints me because it's a simple word, right? But all over media, for instance, it becomes premise and premises. No, premise, premises. Simple word, premise, premises. Right. Last word. I have to hear it very clearly. The healthy. Healthy. So the root vegetable haldi. The haldi, the is there in healthy. That's what you're saying. I'm sorry to disappoint you. That's again India's wonderful contribution. It's healthy. Healthy. How do you pronounce the word without the Y? Do you say health? What do you say? Health. So why can't you simply say healthy? Right? So when you get to meet Amitabh Bachchan, wonderful user of the English language, but he gets that particular word wrong in all his advertisements. It's not healthy, it's healthy, wealthy. Right? Okay. To know a word is to know its core meaning. Meaning, words in English have multiple meanings, and very, very few words in English actually have one meaning only. Most of them have two or more. But when we teach, we generally begin with the core meaning. And how do we know what the core meaning is? If you look at a dictionary, there'll be multiple meanings listed as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 1 generally is the core meaning, because that is based on the frequency of occurrence of that particular meaning in both writing and speech, the corpus. So, you can tell from this that the core meaning of the word mother is a female parent. So all of us have mothers or had mothers, right? But there is another meaning which is also used, the title of a woman who's head of a convent, right? So knowing a word doesn't simply end with knowing its core meaning. It also means you need to know its other meanings. Example, our own word English. So in the dictionary, this will be your core meaning, the primary meaning. English refers to the language that is spoken in countries like the UK, the USA, Australia, New Zealand, etc., Canada. Right? But you'll also see this figuring there as one of its meanings, and this is the sense in which we are all gathered here. So it's a UGC refresher course in the study of English language. Obviously, it also refers to the people of England. Right? So, if you say, I know what the word English means, you better be sure that you know all this. Right? Knowing a word means knowing its root form, what is the root, and its derivatives. So, for instance, you have the root nation. You have the word nation. And using suffixes, you can get national, nationality, nationalism, nationalist, nationalistic, nationalize, nationally, and nationwide. All suffixes. You can also have anti-national, international, internationalism, internationalist, internationalize, and intranational, all of which are formed with prefixes. Right? So one of the longest words in the dictionary is the word, Oxford English Dictionary, is the word anti-disestablishmentarianism. So the root there is establish. So you go left, you're looking at the prefixes. If you go right, you're looking at the suffixes. And you can therefore work out the meaning first by going to the suffixes. Establish, establishment, establishmentarian, establishmentarianism, and then the opposites, the negative form, dis and anti. Knowing a word means what its grammatical value is. And let's take a very simple example. Look at the word that. It's a word you use hundreds of times in the day. As a determiner, you get a sentence like, look at that man. Which man? That man over there. Which is different from, who is that? Right? Who's that person? Who is that? So it's a pronoun in the second case. In the third case, you ask the question, where's the letter that came yesterday? Right? So, which letter? That letter. So it's a relative pronoun. A relative pronoun that leads to a relative clause, an adjectival clause. The fourth occurrence of that is that of a conjunction. She said that the story was true. Right? So particularly with noun clauses, you begin with the conjunction that. And lastly, as an adverb, I can't walk that far, I'm too tired. How far? That far. Okay. Last feature for discussion, and probably the most important, collocations. What's collocation? Anybody? No, collocation is not usage. Sorry, say that again. Certain words? Need the company of some other words. Oh, okay. Okay. So you're saying words, some of them, tend to go together. And over a period of time, they kind of become fixed pieces of usage. Right? So, you ride a bicycle, but you drive a car. Right? You don't ride a car. Right? That's collocation. You shed bitter tears, but you don't shed sweet tears or sour tears. Unless you're a bad poet. So you can say strong winds and heavy seas, but you can't say strong seas and heavy winds. That's the way it is. See, somebody thought of this collocation 200 years ago, we don't know, and it stayed with us. Okay. So you have coffee right there in the middle, and you have 5 adjectives orbiting the word coffee. Which of them collocate with coffee? Strong coffee. Light coffee. Okay. Bitter coffee. Okay. Filter coffee, we come to later. There are many more. You stay with this now. Which of them is not acceptable? All are acceptable? Weak is not acceptable. Mild? That also is not acceptable. Beg your pardon? Not weak. Not weak, she's saying not weak. Not even bitter. Okay. Let's start with bitter. You can have bitter coffee. No, it's different. Different, right? The coffee has become strong as a result of the bitterness. That's different. Right? But bitter coffee is a kind of coffee that some people actually enjoy. Right? And some kinds of Turkish coffee, for instance, is really bitter, but there are thousands of people who enjoy it. Strong coffee, everyone enjoys a cup of strong coffee, acceptable. Okay. Mild coffee, yes, you can. Right? You can have coffee that has a mild flavor. That's what it means. Which is different from the noun mild. So in Europe, you can order a glass of mild. What that is beer with a very mild flavor. So when you go to Europe, make sure you say mild coffee. If you stop with the word mild, you'll get beer. Bitter is also one of the homemade, generally, kind of beers. Absolutely right. Right. Okay. That leaves us with light and weak. what is light coffee? Is that acceptable? All of us? Is that the opposite of strong coffee? It is? Okay, then what is weak coffee? That's bad collocation. Okay, in standard English, native speak English, I must say, the opposite of strong coffee is weak coffee. Okay? But we Indians, and we are a huge number, right? And we've also actually influenced people in Sri Lanka, Nepal, the Maldives, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. As a result, light coffee is perfectly acceptable, and I've actually put it into the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, right? One of the many that went in there, much against the original objections of the team in Oxford I was working with, right? This was about 10 years ago, right? Till I had to prove to them that this is a perfectly acceptable choice here. But remember, just 5 kilometers from here, you have 5-star hotels whose waiters deal with foreign clients, and when you ask them to serve you, and you come up and say, "What can I get you, sir?" Very often, the person will say, "I want coffee," and the waiter will then say, "Weak or strong, sir?" Right? Because he's been trained in the hotel to deal with strong and weak. But you and I, right, cannot go to the canteen on campus here and tell the man there, "Can I have weak coffee tonight, please?" You understand what I'm trying to say? So there are some collocations that we respect as users of English and Indian users of English, which is why I called it IE, Indian English earlier, is a perfectly acceptable form of use, right? And this is just for you to look at. One of you gave me that example, right? This will take a long time to do. We're not going to do it, except that all men are handsome, which is why I've ticked it. Okay. And no woman is handsome. Is that right? Is that right? You can't have a handsome woman? You can have handsome woman. A handsome woman is a woman with attractive features, but big, large features. Not the small, pretty features you associate very often with people who win beauty contests, right? This is the kind of features people would associate with Indira Gandhi and Margaret Thatcher. They're both referred to as very handsome women. So it's a compliment you're paying the woman when you call her handsome. But remember, if you're going to compliment a woman you meet as a handsome person, make sure she knows this collocation. Okay. Last piece of advice I'm going to take. Okay. I'm sure all of you have some knowledge, if not a great deal of knowledge of cricket. What is cricket? I've always asked myself, if I were to explain this to somebody who doesn't know the game, how would I explain it? What is cricket? Sorry, yeah. Listen to our friend. Yes, sir.
It's a game
Loud. It's a game
played by two teams,
played by 2 teams.
having 11 players.
Each team has 11 players. Excellent.
It's also insect.
No. You stay with the game. You stay with the core meaning now. Yes, sir. Go on. That's not good enough. I don't know what that means. How is the game played? Beg your pardon? Played with a bat. Oh, there's a ball also. A bat and a ball. And sticks. You mean stumps. Okay. Okay. And then what happens to all these three things now?
The objective is to prevent the ball from hitting the stumps
Whose objective?
and to get it across.
Whose objective?
The batsman, the one team's objective.
The one who's holding the bat. Okay? And the one who's throwing the ball at him, bowling,
He's aiming for the stumps.
he's aiming for the stumps. Okay. Okay. Now, this is precisely the kind of question a foreigner asked an Englishman 100 years ago. Right? And this is what he got as an answer. Can I read it out to you, please? Cricket as explained to a foreign visitor. You have two sides, one out in the field and one in. Each man that's in the side that's in goes out, and when he's out, he comes in, and the next man goes in until he's out. When they're all out, the side that's out comes in, and the side that's been in goes out and tries to get those coming in out. Sometimes you get men still in and not out. When both sides have been in and out, including the not outs, that's the end of the game. How's that? Okay. Thank you very much. Happy teaching.